Hi. I'd like to talk about Syria today. The reason I'd like to talk about Syria with everybody, even though nobody's listening to this speech except for you, is because I think it is the most important issue that has occurred in the past 45 years, up to leading up to World War II, would be the last, I think, event that truly became global and then to turn into a global war. And I think Syria has the potential to do that, and so that's why I'm going to talk about it tonight. So what is Syria? Syria is a country in the Middle East, on the outskirts of the Middle East. That is over to the right. Syria is an incredibly proud and industrious country. It is ruled by a dictator, and his name is Assad. Um, the origins of the civil war are a bit complicated. They they had roots uh, deeply rooted inside of Syria. It it did begin as a civil war, but the way it began is quite interesting. In 2011, a movement a movement spread across the Middle East known as or referred to as the Obama administration as the Arab Spring and scholars. The Arab Spring was an event that we were anticipating actually and waiting for. So initially we were very excited about the Arab Spring, which was when democracies or democratic movements began to form and in some cases flourish inside or in the Middle East, which was the whole point of Iraq. And so we have this movement begin in Tunisia. It topples a dictator, a very strong dictator. Um, he was not as strong as he let off to be, and he was toppled very easily, very quickly, and democratically. However, as this movement moved right and across the Arab Spring, including Libya, Egypt, even Saudi Arabia, every country really in the Middle East, and mainly the Arab Spring, started to see a swell, if you will, in rebel fighters fighting for the removal of their dictator and to install a democracy. That is at least how the Americans view the Arab Spring. How might a Middle Eastern person inside of Libya or inside of Tunisia or inside of another country view it? They may view it entirely differently. Some of them truly had aspirations to become a democratic state and to install a democratic government. Now, whether or not that's even relevant right now, I'll talk about that later. Um, Basically, as the Arab Spring continued to evolve and continued to effectively, as it seemed, remove dictators from their place, such as Gaddafi in Libya, such as um, sorry, such as the leader of Egypt. I'm forgetting his name. He was removed by a military coup. It was a result of a military coup. And then in Syria, we had something very interesting occur. We had Assad we had protests occur in Damascus, the capital of Syria. And during this time, they were small protests, relatively speaking. They were very small, and they were by freedom fighters. Now, freedom fighter is loosely defined and a highly controversial term, which I'll get to later. But Assad went to the UN and he very staunchly said, I'm a Syrian and I'm going to die a Syrian. And what that meant was he was going to not only repel the rebellion, but squash the rebellion at any cost. And so he reacted with outright force and overwhelming force at that. And so with this overwhelming force that he used, he created he helped facilitate the environment for a civil war. The civil war was already going to occur because of Iraq and because of many other regional factors. So the Syrian civil war is special because it involves a country that is in the middle of a civil war, experiencing the civil war for a much different reason than every other country in the region, except for Iraq and some other countries. It is going through a process of right now, Assad. Sorry. Anyway, Assad tried to regain power, and by doing so, he created an environment for terrorists, much like what happened in Libya, much like what happened in Iraq, and much like what happened in every single other country the Arab Spring occurred in, except for Tunisia. So, Assad is seeing these countries fail. He's seeing Libya fail. He's seeing Egypt getting thrown over by the military. He's seeing Iraq on its border collapsing. He's seeing no possible solution here. He is seeing in his paradigm a Syrian civil war invaded by foreign fighters, and in his opinion, probably facilitated by foreign fighters and foreign powers, which is what I'm going to talk about next. My next point is the U.S. foreign policy. Our current foreign policy is to destroy ISIL and to destroy Assad. We cannot do both. It is impossible. I will be clear again. We cannot do both. It is impossible. If we go in and surgically remove ISIS, then we will hand Syria over to Assad. So that's out of the question as far as policy is making sense, because we can't do that unless we fund ISIS to defeat Assad and then at a later date remove ISIS and whoever ended up in power inside this democratic struggle, and then produce a new government from scratch. That's where we are really. And so then we have the Russians with their foreign policy, which is saying we need to secure Syria. Well, let me be clear. At first, Russia was on board with the idea that since Assad has committed he's created such a humanitarian crisis that because of this, he is no longer fit to rule. However, Russia has since changed their position. The position is now that the region is in chaos. They see the United States leading by and large, and they see, of course, they see opportunity and national interest, but what's in their national security is different than their national interest. Directly related to the national security and their economy is Syria. And if Syria falls, not just Assad, but if Syria falls, the entire Middle East will implode below Russia. So it is easy to understand why Russia is taking the approach that they are. They don't want the region to implode. They know that Iraq is going to continue to be a problem, which is going to continue to destroy the Middle East. They are trying their best, in their opinion, and in their national security and national interest, to take a different approach and to destroy the democratic rebels that we support. Because our policy is to give weapons to Syrian freedom fighters that we have vetted and money. Now, we only approved a very small number of these people for this to occur, and we knew from the beginning that this policy would fail. Even the president himself, for the first time in U.S. history, was doubtful of this mission working in any way. He was sincerely doubtful that the mission would work, and it didn't, and ultimately ended up working. But either way, the whole fundamental point of what are we doing in Syria is this. We are funding people who are not as bad as ISIS, who live next to ISIS, who know ISIS. So inadvertently, we are funding ISIS. And that is where the whole slogan of Donald Trump's, Obama created ISIS, which is ridiculous. But policy has created, and this predates Obama, what the policy has created is a situation where we cannot avoid to strengthen ISIS and topple Assad. So we are doing the latter, or the former. We are doing the former. We are arming ISIS, and they do have our weapons, our military, and our money. A lot of the freedom fighters that we supported eventually turned to ISIS because they offer more money. So to pivot a little back to Russia. So the Russians are seeing this as well, and they watched it for a while before they did, about 4 years before they did anything at all inside Syria, other than sell weapons to the Assad regime. But that's basically normal. So we have Russia waiting, and they're not sure what to do because they're not sure what we're going to do. As soon as they figure out that we're not going to do anything except flood money and flood weapons into the country, which is probably what Putin expected us to do, they're sitting back and they're saying, okay, so when Assad is gone, who is going to be the leader of Syria? Will anybody be the leader of Syria? And they don't know the answer to that question. And so they're sitting around their table and they're saying, all right, well, the Middle East isn't going to implode beneath us, so we're going to invade Syria. It's in our economic well-being and our national security to invade Syria. So now I just want to quickly talk about well, I've talked about most of the points. It's probably a little scattered, but I just want to kind of come back and say, after all of this, the U.S. foreign policy, the Russian foreign policy, has created a struggle, a Cold War type struggle, is what most scholars are referring to it. And so the Russians essentially are all in, and now we are in a position to make matters worse again, unfortunately. But so this is going to heighten tensions with Russia, essentially. At the end of the day, no matter what happens with Syria, the more important global issue for the United States is what is our relationship going to be with Russia in the 21st century? And if we cannot work together, our natural ally, that is Russia, if we cannot work together, and we cannot solve problems on the world stage, which we clearly are not we're not doing, then that opens up the entire question to World War III. And that's why people are scared. And that's why Syria is important, because it is a global conflict, and it evolved from a civil war to a regional war to a global conflict. However, the roots of the civil war that I was talking about earlier, they really began in Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and it gets a lot more complicated. And so what I've done in this speech is try to simplify this entire thing down to the United States has a policy that is fueling the war, and Russia does too. We both need to stop. It is not our war. It is an internal problem that has turned into a global war because of our own national interest coming to a head with each other. China as well. The Syrian conflict shows the problem it causes when we put the U.S. in a position to solve international conflicts, and when wrong decisions on our past caused the conflict to become much bigger? Now, I do not have a clear answer, and I'm not trying to present one. I just wanted to explain the Syrian situation, and I hope that the speech is okay.